Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to unpack an absolutely fascinating essay by Salima titled Resistance for the Sake of Resistance. We're going to dive deep into what a victim mindset really truly costs us and why so often we find ourselves fighting these exhausting battles that actually ended years ago. Let's get right into it.
So, Salima kicks off this essay with just a brilliantly gripping hook. She was listening to a foreign policy analyst talk about nations, grand strategy, and geopolitics. He was explaining why certain nations will just keep on fighting, long after the fighting has stopped doing them any actual good. And this hits the nail right on the head for our core concept, why resistance, which, by the way, is completely necessary for survival in the beginning, eventually becomes a permanent posture. It stops being a smart tactic. It becomes an entire way of seeing the world. It becomes an identity. Literally, resistance just for the sake of resistance.
But right here is where Salima makes this profound pivot. As she's listening to this geopolitical breakdown, a light bulb just goes on. She realizes he wasn't describing a country anymore. Actually, scratch that, he wasn't describing a country at all. He was describing a person. He was describing people she knew, and even a past version of herself. It turns out the exact same dynamics that trap entire nations in endless, pointless conflicts are the exact same dynamics that trap us in our own personal histories.
You see, this totally legitimate defense mechanism breaks down in a really distinct three-step progression. First off, there's the real wound. Early on, resistance is pure wisdom, right? It protects you. It keeps you alive. It teaches you exactly what danger looks like. And that brings us to step 2, necessary survival. But here's the catch. Survival has this quiet, super sneaky temptation. Because if we aren't careful, we slide right into step 3, a permanent identity. The wound stops being something that simply happened to you, and it slowly, quietly becomes who you are. What once protected us literally begins to define us.
Section 1. The Perpetual Historian, when the past never stays in the past.
So the perpetual historian is that part of us that carries such a long, heavy memory of injustice, betrayal, or disappointment that every single new moment we experience is interpreted exclusively through yesterday's pain. She keeps a flawless archive, exactly who betrayed her, exactly when she was overlooked, exactly how the rules changed after she'd already started playing the game. I mean, her receipts are meticulously organized. And here is the absolutely crucial thing to understand. The historian isn't lying. The stories are 100% true. You really were hurt. You really were dismissed. The evidence is all there. But the tragedy isn't that she remembers. The tragedy is that this flawless archive stands at the entrance of every new opportunity, checking its ID before letting it in. True memories are getting promoted into positions they were never, ever meant to hold.
Section 2. Trauma as a strategy. When trauma runs the strategy department.
Okay, so what actually happens when your past becomes more than just history and becomes management? The analyst pointed out something that transforms this from just a neat observation into a mirror we kind of can't look away from. Trauma makes people really poor strategists. Not because trauma makes you weak, not at all, but because it organizes your attention entirely around danger. It drastically narrows your imagination. When your whole inner world revolves around avoiding another wound, every single decision is quietly made in conversation with the past. You stop asking, hey, what am I trying to build? And you start asking, how do I make sure this never happens again? So what does that look like in the real world? It looks like this. You don't negotiate the salary. You prepare yourself for rejection before anyone is even answered. You shut the door yourself so nobody else gets the chance to slam it in your face.
You don't launch the business. No way. You rehearse failure in your mind over and over again until staying completely invisible feels infinitely safer than being seen. Your strategy department is essentially telling you that the only way to win is to just not play the game at all.
And finally, and man, this is probably the most exhausting part, you don't rest. Because somewhere deep, deep down inside you, rest still feels incredibly dangerous. When you're constantly bracing for impact, letting your guard down just feels like an open invitation for a brand new wound.
Now, this highlights a massive, game-changing difference between vigilance and vision. People who have spent years surviving often confuse the two. When you're operating purely on vigilance, defense becomes your entire life strategy. You spend years expecting locked doors, so much so that when an open door actually appears right in front of you, it looks highly suspicious. Salima notes how this showed up in her own relationship with money. She spent years hoarding and keeping score thinking it was just good financial discipline. But looking back, it wasn't strategy at all. It was just scar tissue wearing a beautifully tailored suit. She was just pushing against things, not moving toward any true vision.
Section 3. The Invisible War, Fighting Ghosts.
Let's actually slow down for a second here because we really need to talk about what is arguably the cruelest consequence of this victim mindset. When you are constantly resisting, you aren't just fighting your current circumstances, you are literally fighting ghosts. This mindset keeps you emotionally loyal to people who have long stopped thinking about you. The manager who underestimated you 5 years ago, the teacher who made you feel small, that relative whose casual criticism still echoes in your head every single time you check your bank account. You are giving your precious, limited energy and loyalty to the totally unaware.
It basically creates this permanent internal courtroom. Years later, these people from your past are still participating in your life decisions, and they don't even know it. Every new opportunity you get becomes another trial, and somehow they are still sitting up there on the judge's bench in your mind. Meanwhile, they're out there living their lives completely unaware that inside your head, the war never actually ended.
Section 4. From Victim to Sovereign, the Boardroom Realignment.
So, how do we fix this? How do we stop fighting ghosts? We have to shift from being a victim to being a sovereign. And the most beautiful thing about this is that healing does not ask you to deny your history. The history stands. The injustice stands. The wound was very real. But the role those memories play simply has to change. The past absolutely deserves a seat at the table, but it does not deserve the head of it. To help us make this shift, Salima provides some incredibly powerful questions to ask yourself. First, where am I resisting simply because resistance has become familiar? Have you been fighting for so long that you don't even know how to put the sword down even when there's literally no one left on the battlefield?
Next, ask yourself, which decision am I making right now from fear instead of from vision? Are your choices currently being driven by a genuine ambition to build something great, or are they really just complex maneuvers designed to avoid getting hurt again?
And then, really think about this one. If I no longer needed to defend myself, what would I finally have the energy to create? Just think about how much mental bandwidth is getting chewed up by the perpetual historian meticulously keeping those receipts. Imagine reclaiming all of that energy and pouring it into creation instead of just endless defense.
And this brings us right back to the ultimate question that foreign policy analysts asked, the one Salima couldn't get out of her head. To what end? What life am I actually trying to build? Resistance was never, ever supposed to become a final destination. It was meant to be a bridge. You leave, you draw your boundaries, you survive, but eventually, survival has to hand the steering wheel back over to creation.
At the end of the day, you literally have to demote your past. When the past is the CEO, it dictates your life's entire strategy and tries to write the rest of your story based entirely on old wounds. But when the past is just a consultant, it simply explains the chapters you've already lived. It provides useful records. You give thanks to the historian. She noticed patterns. She protected you when pulling up the drawbridge was absolutely necessary. But then, with gratitude, you gently take the pen right out of her hand.
Salima leaves us with this incredible realization. The past gets to be a consultant. It no longer gets to be the CEO. The wound was real. Case closed. But the rest of your life isn't just evidence for a trial that ended years ago. It's creation. It's pure possibility. And most importantly, it is yours. So I'll leave you with this one question to think about today. Who is running the boardroom of your mind right now? And is it time to finally bring in a new CEO?